Ow! Stop that. Give people a little time. Ah, you aggravating piece of shit. I don't even remember what it's called. Sorry guys, I'm just finishing up the smallest bit of work here. We getting spooky? Hell yeah, we are. You better have thought of what you wanted. I've got so much Florida. Well, so much. I've got quite a bit of Florida. And for the memes, I got a book of fishing stories. I have no idea what they're about. DNA RNA shield. DNA RNA shield. Good shit. Go back to that. Mark that shit as red. Should be fine. Every time another spooky story stream starts. Yup. 'Tis terror time. I got a whole bunch of shit. Hold on. I gotta... There's a lot of ordering things that's happened. Yeah, sorry. I've been working all goddamn day on my dissertation. And I made, like, no progress either, which is great. But yes. I was interrupted last night. Need to start writing again. Dude, same. I do too. I have an itch to keep writing the matriarch, but I don't know if I'm stable enough to do that. And I have all these spooky story ideas that I want to try my hand at. I'm not as good at writing that stuff as you are, but I still try. I still try. But yeah. Yo, Thunder Kitty. Yeah, what do you guys, where do you guys want to go? I've got a fisherman story, I've got a mediocre at best. That doctor doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. Don't let him tell you anything in terms of how well you write. That's a bunch of horse shit. I'm still mad about that. I'm still properly mad at that doctor. Ah, bird fact. Did you know that ducks and their relatives drink water, which is a little weird because they should be able to get all of the water they need when they eat because they eat out of lakes and stuff. So, like, why don't they just drink when they eat? Well, as it turns out, drinking is a way to be polite to other ducks and geese around the area. Motherfucker. And it's a way of being like, hey, I'm not aggressive, just let me be. So, ducks drink to be social. Kind of. I'm trying to find the other... I just got like a billion stories from the south here. Where the hell did I put them? Because I know you said Florida yesterday. Yo, Smiles, what's up? Yeah, I'm taking requests. So you should drink in front of them to not seem like a threat. I mean... I don't know if that would help. I don't know. Holy crap. I might have gone overboard on the southern. I've got a lot of southern shit here. I've got, like, American naval ghost stories now. Like, from the Navy. I've got that. I basically went crazy at 1 a.m. when the internet finally came back. So yeah, just shout out what you want. There's one story I found because somebody wanted me to do a story about fishing yesterday. And I found a Chinese fishing story if y'all want to start with that. It's called The Fisherman and His Friend. My phone is going crazy. It's on the other side of the room, and I still hear that motherfucker. Who the fuck is ordering so much shit from him? Alright, whatever. Chinese fishing story, great combo. You went full southern. You don't go full southern. You're probably right. Fish of a fish, they have no feet. Had a proper scary dream last night. Reminded me of Spooks today. Hey, if you want to talk your dream, go ahead. I like to have my chat at a rolling boil. Alright, so y'all want fish? Okay, here's fish. I got that book of fishing stories almost as a meme, but I will read from it if somebody requests it. Alright, this is The Fisherman and His Friend. In the northern parts of Zizhou, there lived a man named Xu, a fisherman by trade. Every night, when he went to fish, he would carry some wine with him, and drink and fish by turns, always taking care to pour out a libation on the ground, accompanied by the following invocation. Drink too, ye drowned spirits of the river. I don't know why he's Irish. He's supposed to be Chinese, but he's Irish right now. Oh, fish or fsh if they have no eyes. Fucking brain. Oh, that. That's not even your fault. I don't know why my brain auto-corrected ETES to feats, which is wrong by every metric. Alright. Drink too, ye drowned spirits of the river. Such was his regular custom, and it was also noticeable that, even on occasions when other fishermen caught nothing, he always got a full basket. One night, as he was sitting drinking by himself, a young man suddenly appeared and began walking up and down near him. Xu offered him a cup of wine, which was readily accepted, and they remained chatting together throughout the night. Xu, meanwhile, not catching a single fish. However, just as he was giving up all hope of doing anything, the young man rose and said he would go a little down the stream and beat them up towards Xu, which he accordingly did, returning in a few minutes and warning him to be on the lookout. Xu now heard a noise like that of shoal coming up the stream, and casting his net, made a splendid haul, all that he caught being over a foot in length. Greatly delighted, he now prepared to go home, first offering his companion a share of the fish, which the latter declined, saying he had often received kindnesses from Mr. Xu, and that he would be only too happy to help him regularly in the same manner, if Xu would accept his assistance. The latter replied that he did not recollect ever meeting him before, and that he should be much obliged for any aid the young man might choose to afford him, regretting at the same time his inability to make him any adequate return. He then asked the young man his name and his surname, and the young man said his surname was Wang, adding that Xu might address him when they met as Wang Liu Liang, having no other name. Thereupon they parted, and the next day Xu sold his fish and bought some more wine, which he repaired as usual to the riverbank. There he found his companion already awaiting him, and they spent the night together in precisely the same way as the preceding one, the young man beating up fish for him as before. This went on for some months, until at length, one evening, the young man, with many expressions of his thanks and his regrets, told Xu that they were about to part forever. Much alarmed by his melancholy tone in which his friend had communicated this news, Xu was on the point of asking him for an explanation, and when the young man stopped him, and himself proceeded as follows. The friendship that has grown between us is truly surprising, and, now that we shall meet no more, there is no harm in telling you the whole truth. I am a disembodied spirit, the soul of one who was drowned in the river when tipsy. I have been here many years, and your former success in fishing was due to the fact that I used to secretly beat up fish towards you in return for the libations that you were accustomed to pour out. Tomorrow my time is up. My substitute will arrive, and I shall be born again in the world of mortals. We have but We have but this one evening left, and I therefore take advantage of it to express my feelings to you." On hearing these words, Shu was at first very much alarmed. However, he had grown so accustomed to his friend's society that his fears soon passed away. And filling up a goblet, he said with a sigh, "Liu Long, old fellow, drink this up, and away with melancholy. It's hard to lose you, but I'm glad enough for your sake. I won't think of my own sorrow." He then inquired of Liu Long, who was to be his substitute, which the latter replied, "Come to the riverbank tomorrow afternoon, and you'll see a woman drowned. She is the one." Just then, the village cocks began to crow, and with tears in their eyes, the two friends bade each other farewell. Next day, Shu waited on the riverbank to see if anything would happen, and lo! A woman carrying a child in her arms came along. When close to the edge of the river, she stumbled and fell into the water, managing, however, to throw the child safely onto the bank, where it lay kicking and sprawling and crying at the top of its voice. The woman herself sank and rose several times, until at last she succeeded in clutching hold of the bank and pulled herself, dripping out. And then, after resting a while, she picked up the child and went on her way. All this time, Sue had been in a great state of excitement. He was on the point of running to help the woman out of the water, but he remembered that she was to be the substitute of his friend, and accordingly restrained himself from doing so. Then when he saw the woman get out by herself, he began to suspect that Liu Long's words had not been fulfilled. That night, he went to fish out as usual, and before long the young man arrived and said, "We meet once again. There is no need now to speak of separation." Uh-oh, I scrolled really far. Fuck. Oh, speak of separation. Shu asked him how it was so, to which he replied, "The woman you saw had already taken my place, but I could not bear to hear the child cry, and I saw that my one life would be purchased at the expense of their 2 lives. Wherefore I let her go, and now I cannot say when I shall have another chance. The union of our destinies may not yet be worked out." "Ah, alas," sighed Shu. "Its noble conduct of yours is enough to move God Almighty." By God Almighty, they probably mean the Jade Emperor. After this, the two friends went on as they had before, until one day Liu Long again said that he had come to bid Shu farewell. Shu thought he had found another substitute, but Liu Long told him that his former behavior had so pleased Almighty Heaven that he had been appointed guardian angel of Wuzhen in the Jiaoyuan district, and that on the following morning he would start for his new post. Gather. "And if you do not forget the days of our friendship," added he, "I pray you come and see me, in spite of the long journey." "Ah, truly," replied Shu. "You well deserve to be made a god. But the paths of gods and men lie in different directions, and even if the distance were nothing, how should I manage to meet you again?" "Don't be afraid on that score," said Liu Long, "but come." And then he went away, and Shu returned home. The latter immediately began to prepare for the journey, which caused his wife to laugh at him and say, "Supposing you do find a place at the end of the long journey, you won't be able to hold a conversation with the clay image." Su, however, paid no attention to her remarks and traveled straight to Jiaoyuan, where he learned from the inhabitants that there really was a village called Wuzhen, whither he forthwith proceeded to and took up his whither he forthwith proceeded. God, this translator must have been old. And took up his abode at an inn. He checked in at a hotel. He then inquired of the landlord where the village temple was, to which the latter replied by asking him somewhat hurriedly if he was speaking to Mr. Su. Su informed him that his name was Su, asking in reply how he came to know it, whereupon the landlord further inquired if his native place was not Zizhou. Su told him it was, and again asked him how he knew all this, to which the landlord made no answer, but rushed out of the room. And in a few moments the place was crowded with young and old, men, women, and children, all come to visit Shu. They then told him that a few nights before they had seen their guardian deity in a vision, and that they had informed him that Mr. Shu would shortly arrive, and had bidden them to provide him with the traveling expenses, etc. Shu was very much astonished at this, and went off at once to the shrine, where he invoked his friend as follows. Ever since we'd parted, I have had you daily and nightly in my thoughts, and now that I have fulfilled my promise of coming to see you, I have to thank you for the orders you have issued the people of the place. As for me, I have nothing to offer you but a cup of wine, which I pray you accept as though we were drinking together on the river bank. He then burnt a quantity of paper money, when a wind suddenly arose, which, after whirling around behind the shrine, soon dropped, and all was still. That night Shu dreamed that his friend came to him, dressed in his official cap and robes, and very different in appearance from what he used to be, and thanked him, saying, "It is truly kind of you to visit me thus. I only regret that my position makes me unable to meet you face to face. And though near, we are still so far. The people here will give you a trifle, which pray accept for my sake. And when you go away, I will see you a short way on your journey." A few days afterward, she prepared to start, in spite of numerous invitations to stay, which poured in upon him from all sides. And then the inhabitants loaded him with presents of all kinds, and escorted him out of the village. There a whirlwind rose, and accompanied him several miles, when he turned around and invoked his friend thus: "Liu Long, take care of your valued person. Do not trouble yourself to come any farther. Your noble heart will ensure happiness to this district." God damn it. To this district, and there is no occasion for me to give a word of advice to my old friend. By and by, the whirlwind ceased, and the villagers, who were much astonished, returned to their own homes. Shu, too, traveled homewards, and, being now a man of some means, ceased to work any more as a fisherman. Whenever he met a Jiaoyuan man, he would ask him about the guardian angel, being always informed in reply that he was a most beneficent god. Some say the place was Shikenzhuang in Jiangqin. I can't say which it was myself. And that's our fisherman story. Wait a second. There's a whole section here. Ah, it's about a kingfisher, that's why. Alright, so that was that story. Where do y'all want to go next? If I didn't put y'all to sleep. I do owe you some Florida, don't I? Chaos. I'm pretty sure that I do. If you're still here. Oh my god. Wouldn't you know it? The first friggin' story in the Florida chapter of this book is the fisherman's ghost. Well... No, we're saving that one for later. You want Disney World? Alright. This one is called The Glowing Eyes. It's something that happened on the Suwannee River in the early 1900s, soon after my grandparents got married. This was around 1906 or 1916. Anyway, my grandparents used to live on the Suwannee River. In fact, they owned a store up there. I used to like to sit out on the front porch at night and watch the sun go down. One night they were sitting on the porch, and these two glowing eyes appeared over the fence post. My grandmother said, "What the hell is that?" And my grandfather sat on the porch again, and sure enough, two glowing eyes reappeared over the fence post. This time there was a little noise with it. My grandmother said, "I wonder if it's the ghost of one of those old Spaniards looking for his gold." There are a lot of old Spanish and French cemeteries around here. Well, the third night, they sat on the porch again, and this time when the glowing eyes appeared, my grandmother ran inside and got my grandfather's shotgun. He'd said that he'd shot the blasted thing right between the eyes. He's sure he killed it. Now my grandfather was a crack shot, and if he said he hit the thing between the eyes, he probably did. They ran over to the post to see what he'd killed, but there wasn't nothing there. My grandparents were so excited that they went into town and told all their friends and neighbors about the shooting and the glowing eyes. And everyone was sure that something bad was going to happen on account of it. Well, they were right, because the next morning, my grandparents looked out their bedroom window, and the whole fence had been torn up. Even the fence posts were removed. My grandfather ran out to inspect the damage, and he saw where somebody had dug a hole where one of the fence posts was. The hole was empty, but you could tell where a cooking kettle or a wash tub had been. It's a good thing my grandfather didn't see whoever did this, 'cause there sure would have been some shooting going around there. On the same day this happened, one of the town boys disappeared. He came back 10 years later with a brand new car and a new wife. My grandfather accused him of digging up the gold, but the boy claimed that he'd left the day before the fence was torn up. This happened not far from Branford. Branford's as far as the Spanish vessels could navigate. It was an inland seaport. There are still a lot of Spanish around there. There's even an old mansion. This is one of those missions where the monks don't talk to each other. There is a lot of that sort of supernatural thing around here. My dad's side of the family is a bunch of seers. One day my dad told my mom, "Don't go to work today. Someone's coming and you don't want to meet them." Well, later on they found out that my mom's aunt had died, and her uncle had gone to her job looking for her. Well, that's a non sequitur at the end, but I'll take it. Alright, that's Florida. Where to next, guys? I'm so curious about this fishing book. I shouldn't be, but I am. Wait a second. There's a fucking ghost section? Of the fishing book? What? Well, I gotta know this now. Alright. Mary's Cottage. Page 77. Well, I gotta know this now. Hold on. I'm gonna change this to something more appropriate. Let's see. I know I have a fishing one somewhere. This is a bit too daylight, actually. Okay, hold on. Sorry, chat. I mean, it's way too bright, but... Let's see. God, I should learn how to not be a perfectionist about these things, but... Maybe... There's gotta be something better. I mean, or we could just choose the one with the literal fish. That works. Alright. Mayor's Cottage. The Lows in the west of Ireland are remote places now, but were even more so in the years between the two world wars. Remoteness can lead to very strange happenings, particularly in bad weather. Added to the eerie emptiness of the Celtic landscape, the weather's always played a pivotal role in fishing these massive waters. Coming from the Atlantic Ocean, it can change dramatically in a short time and catch out the unwary fishermen, especially those afloat. History does not relate which low Charles Cuthbertson was fishing. We do know that it was his first trip to Ireland, and he was enthusiastic about his trout fishing that he was prepared to ignore the pessimistic weather prognosis from the boatman he'd hired for the week. After 2 successful days fishing, the boatman refused to take Charles out on the Wednesday, saying that an Atlantic storm was on its way, and it would turn the low into a maelstrom by the afternoon. Charles didn't want to lose even a few hours' precious fishing, so he promptly loaded his tackle into the boat and started the Seagull engine. He motored away on his own to begin adrift in the bay along the north shore, where they'd caught some lovely trout the day before. He was soon catching fish and became completely focused on the trout, so that, without really being aware of it, he drifted further and further out from the bay and into the main body of the low. He was conscious that the wave height was gradually increasing, but only because the extra movement was helping him attract more fish to his top dropper. He sensed no danger at that point. By the time Charles fully appreciated the deteriorating conditions, all landmarks had disappeared. The increasing wind had driven a low cloud in from the west, and it had begun to rain. He was mildly concerned now. Only mildly. So he stowed his rod in the bottom of the boat and started the Seagull being the boat. Then turned the boat into the wind and opened the throttle. Almost immediately, a wave came over the bows and soaked his fishing bag. Then another quickly followed. To stop shipping water, he had to close the throttle until the boat only just had steerage way, so he resigned himself to a long slog home against the elements. The weather closed in very quickly, and the rain became much harder. He was wearing an oiled jacket, but his trousers were soon soaked. He sat there shivering until his worst fear happened. The engine spluttered and died, almost certainly having run out of fuel. The boat swung round, beam onto the waves, and began to roll wildly, so that he couldn't even try to restart the engine. He dragged himself to the middle seat, put out the oars, and managed to turn the boat's bow into the waves. He didn't have a hope of rowing against the weather, but he'd had enough knowledge of boats to know that if he could keep her headed into it, he could let the waves carry him to relative safety until he reached the downwind shore. Charles lost track of time. The experience had become nightmarish, his arm muscles screaming from the effort of keeping the boat straight, and his whole body now soaking wet and freezing. The low cloud had merged into darkness as night closed in, and he felt terribly alone and scared. Eventually, he reached the point where he thought he'd given in, letting the boat come beam on with the weather, and accepting the inevitable. At least it'd be over quickly. Suddenly, the boat hit the bottom with an almighty thump, and seemed to bounce onto the next wave and crash down on solid ground. It swiveled round in a complete circle, and tipped over violently as the next wave hit it, throwing Charles out in the process and hitting him a glancing blow on the head as it landed, upside down, beside him. He lay on the ground, too far gone to even feel relief that he was finally off the water. Some time later he opened his eyes and looked around him. His heart leapt. Through the darkness and the murk, he could see a flickering light, and he convinced himself that it must be from a nearby house. He pulled himself to his feet and staggered toward the light. There, sure enough, was a small cottage with a lantern in the window. Charles collapsed against the door and rapped his iron knocker as loudly as he could. The door opened, and he fell across the threshold. "Oh, you poor dear," said an old woman. "You look as though you've perished. Come in by the fire." "Apparently she's southern. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with my accents today." Charles nodded and smiled his thanks at her. then lurched across and sank to his knees in front of the open grate. "You'll be wanting some tea," she said, "and I have some stew on the hob. Here now, take off those clothes, and I have a blanket you can wear until they're dry." You're too kind," he stammered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Oh, nonsense! I often help the fishermen off the low. Old Mayor never turned one of you away when you needed help." Charles slowly revived as his body began to dry and warm, and the stew tasted as good as anything he could remember eating. The old woman fussed kindly around him to make sure he was comfortable, and soon, utterly exhausted, he was fast asleep, curled up on the floor in front of the fire. When Charles woke, it was quite dark. He felt better, although still cold and weak. However, he was now conscious that the people at the hotel must be worried about him. He felt in the dark for his clothes. They were still uncomfortably damp, but he put them on and tiptoed to the door. He didn't want to disturb Mare, who was obviously still asleep somewhere. He would get the hotel proprietor to drive him out there later on, and he could thank her properly for her kindness and bring her a gift of some kind. He went out and shut the door, noticing the hinges needed a good oiling, and thinking perhaps he could do that for Mare that afternoon. He searched around until he found an obvious track leading away from the cottage. He knew that the road skirted the northern bank of the Low, and he could see a slight lightening of the dawn sky over to his right, showing him where the east was. So he had a natural compass to guide him. Thankfully, the rain had stopped, and the wind had at least lost yesterday's intensity. Charles reached the road after half an hour's brisk walk. He turned left and began the long hike back, but just as the sky began to lighten properly, a car appeared from the direction of the hotel. It stopped, and the hotel proprietor, Sean O'Reilly, stuck his head through the window. "Mr. Cuthbertson, thank God I found you. We thought you were at the bottom of the Low. Get in, man, get in." Charles climbed into the passenger's seat, and they began their drive back to the hotel. "Where'd you spend the night?" O'Reilly asked. "Old Mare took me in to her cottage and looked after me." The car screeched to a halt so abruptly that Charles nearly hit his head on the windshield. What'd you say?" Charles told his story to an increasingly incredulous O'Reilly. When he'd finished, the man said nothing, turned the car around and drove back the other way. Charles asked him a couple times where they were going, but the proprietor remained silent and stony-faced. They reached the track and turned down toward the cottage, the car bouncing around on the potholed surface. Soon the cottage came into view, and O'Reilly stopped the car beside it, whereupon it became glaringly obvious to Charles that something was wrong. There was no longer a snug waterside cottage with smoke coming welcomingly out of the chimney, but a dilapidated, unlived-in ruin, with half its roof missing. And they creaked open the door on rusted hinges. The inside was just as derelict, with daylight now coming in through the broken windows. Charles saw rubbish lying around the floor, and a small pile of wood by the fire grate, in which were some dead embers. "Is this where you stayed last night?" asked O'Reilly. Charles was staring around him, bewildered. There must be some mistake. There's another cottage down here, surely." No more cottages. This is the only one. And no one's lived here since Mare died these 30 years past." "Oh, don't be ridiculous, man. I saw her with my own eyes. She gave me rabbit stew." O'Reilly walked over to the grate and felt the embers. "They're still warm," So you did stay here last night, that's for certain. But not with Mare. I think you must have been suffering from hypothermia or something and you were hallucinating. Charles stared at him, not taking this in at all. But, we always keep some wood and kindling and matches here, just in case anyone gets caught on the low or wants a dry place to have lunch. You must have started the fire yourself. The rest was your imagination, Mr. Cuthbertson, believe me. Charles slowly nodded his head. That must have been it. He'd managed to find his way here and light a fire, but everything else had been a dream. O'Reilly put an arm around his shoulder and guided him out through the door. Let's get you back to the hotel where you can have a bath and a decent breakfast. You'll feel better then. Charles walked back toward the car. Then he stopped dead in his tracks and stared at O'Reilly. If I dreamt all this, how did I know Mare's name? O'Reilly had a weird look on his face. That's the bit I have no answer to, Mr. Cuthbertson. No answer at all. Okay, that was actually a pretty solid ghost story that I was not expecting to find in the fishing book. Okay, I got this book as a meme. I got it as a meme. I wasn't expecting it to be good. Huh. Well, there you go. For good measure. Let's do another. This one's not in the ghost section. Performing pike. While pike are legendary as master predators, however tough they may be, they're not a species one would normally expect to return from the dead. What the f- This isn't in the ghost section! Mark Everard is one of the best anglers for coarse fish you'll ever come across in any part of the world. He's also a PhD and an acknowledged specialist on the life history of British fisheries and fishes. His great passion is catching large roach, but on occasion that led to the extraordinary sequence of events described here. He was after pike. If they were not particularly huge pike where he was fishing, but he hoped he might have a chance of a 20-pounder if things went his way. He was just putting his tackle into the car when one of his neighbors approached. "Do you ever catch pike, Mr. Mark?" she asked. "Funny you should say that. They're today's mission." "Do you ever eat them?" "Not if I can help it. I was reading a recipe for pike in a magazine, and I'd think you'd like to try it." Oh, fuck, they're back to being Irish. God damn it. It sounds different. Any chance of bringing one home with you? Well, I don't mind killing the smaller ones, but I always put Big Pike back alive. Leave it with me and I'll see what I can do. The session went well from the start. Mark had long given up using live baits for pike and instead offered them herring, with an incision down the belly to let the smell of the guts radiate around, to attract predators. From the first cast, small jack pike hit the bait. But it was an hour or so into fishing that he'd had his first take from a reasonable fish. He followed the time-honored method of hooking a pike, let it run with the bait until it stops, and give it a few seconds to turn the fish round in its mouth in preparation for swallowing it head first, and hit before it does. The pike fought well, trying to get in amongst the reeds where it was used to ambushing its prey. Mark used side strain to keep it out in the open water, and gradually wore it down until he could net it and bring it onto bank. It was a fish of around 8 pounds, ideal for eating, as it was big enough at that size for the bone-to-flesh ratio to be in favor of the meat, but not too large to lose its flavor and texture. Remembering his neighbor's request, he rummaged around his box until he found an old wooden priest. I'm sorry, what? An old wooden priest? Okay, an old wooden priest that he rarely used, and gave the pike 2 hard raps over the head. He took out the hooks and left the fish on the bank behind him, and then went on fishing. He continued for another 2 hours, by which time it was getting cold. He had caught several more pike, one of them close to 15 pounds, but the 20 had eluded him this time. He decided it was best to give in and pack up, so he took down his rods and put the 1 pike he'd killed into a black bin liner for ease of transport back to the car. He drove home and went straight around to his neighbor's house with a pike. Oh dear, she said, her face twisted in a horrible grimace. It doesn't look very nice, does it? It looks sort of mean and nasty. Well, I suppose it is, especially if you're a roach or a bream or something. I think it's evolved more to be an efficient hunter than to look nice to us humans. She nodded. I suppose so. Look, I hope you're not offended, but I don't really fancy cooking that. I mean, the recipe sounded lovely, but it didn't mention those teeth with the eyes staring back at me. Do you mind if I don't take it? I could cut off the head and even fillet it if you thought it would help. I don't think it would. I've already seen those eyes and that mouth, and I'd be thinking of them when I was eating. I'm really grateful for you for trying, but I think I'll leave it this time. Mark went home feeling rather miffed. He didn't really like killing pike and had only done so as a favor for the neighbor. He and his family certainly wouldn't eat it, so the fish had died unnecessarily. Mark's conservation background riled at that. It was okay to kill to eat, but anything else was non-sustainable and to be avoided at all cost. He took the fish out of the bin liner and inspected it. It was a bit muddy and had some grass on the flanks, so he took it into the kitchen, filled the basin with cold water, and began to wash it. He was vaguely surprised that rigor mortis hadn't set in. The fish still felt as though it had just come out of the water. The grass bank had been wet and the weather cloudy and cold, so it had kept it moist and there was none of the deterioration in quality that sometimes happens on hotter, sunnier days. However, it was still something of a shock to feel the pike twitch as he washed it, and even more so when it opened its mouth in a sudden snap. Fortunately, his fingers weren't in the way. Mark inspected the pike's head, and there were 2 distinct marks where he had hit it. However, from his ecological training and knowledge of fish skeletal structure, he knew how hard a pike's skull was. He also knew the pike, like eels and even carp, can survive a long time out of the water, provided their skin doesn't dry out too much. Maybe, just maybe, this fish had survived its experience. He collected a keep net from the shed, placed the pike inside, and put both carefully into his garden pond, making sure the netting was loose enough to allow maximum movement for the fish if it woke up properly. He then went inside for supper. Early the next morning, Mark received a telephone call from the BBC. He was a producer of a highly popular series at the time from the natural history of angling, Tales from the Riverbank, in which Mark was an advisor. "We've got a problem, Mark. We're doing a program on the biology of freshwater fish, and we need one of the top predators. Where can we get a pike on short notice? We're filming on the Thames today, but we're hoping to do tank shots in the studio in the next couple days, and we need something up to 10 pounds or so, and we need it fast." Hang on a minute." He went out to the pond, and as he gingerly lifted the keep net out of the water, the pike kicked its tail. Mark inspected the head, and mouth and gills were opening and closing quite normally. It had not only survived, but it was behaving just as a live pike was supposed to. "I can be with you in a couple hours with an 8-pound pike. Any good?" "How the hell?" "Don't ask, it's a long story." Mark put a couple of buckets of water into 2 bin liners, doubled up, then trapped as much air as he could by quickly grabbing the bag opening together in his fist and winding it down to tie off and make a top balloon-type structure. In the absence of neat oxygen, this was an ideal way of transporting fish, allowing the oxygen from the air to dissolve gradually into the water. The bag went into an old cardboard box to give it some stability, and then they set off for the studio. The pike performed brilliantly for the cameras, and was destined to become the star attraction in Pike, Myths and Monsters. If you see a recording of the episode, this is the pike with the characteristic well-healed scar on its flank from some far distant run-in with a bigger pike. Clearly, this was a fish with a charmed life. When the filming had finished, the producer came over to Mark. "Well, I think we've finished with the pike now. We'd better get her back in the river here. She seems plenty of life left in her." Since permission is required to move fish to make sure diseases are not spread unintentionally between rivers, both Mark and the television company had agreements to return the fish to the water where they were caught. So the pike was driven back to the original fishing spot, where Mark looked it over once more to make sure it was okay to release, despite the 2 dents still visible on its head. He slipped it gently back into the river, where the pike slid serenely out of sight toward the reed beds. 18 months later, Mark received a phone call from a friend. He'd been fishing in the same location and caught a 12-pound pike. "I'm sure it's your fish," he said. "There is a definite indentation on the top of its skull with a smaller one just behind it. That scar on its flank kind of looked familiar from the television. It certainly looks to me as though some idiot tried to kill it when it was younger." Okay, these stories are actually kinda good. I'm actually shocked. These are actually good. I got this book on a meme. I did this to meme. I was expecting it not to be great. Well, screw me. They're about fish. They are about fish. Of course they're good. Yo, sassy. On the subject of fish, I finished the peanut butter cake, and God, it was so good. Thank you again for that. And also, since you're here, what can I do for ya? What are you in the mood for? What kind of story you want? We've got... God, we've got so many choices. You can pretty much shout something random and I can probably find it. I've got like a story of like... I've got like a lot of anthologies, so if you want something random, I could just... Why would fish remind you of peanut butter? Is that a legitimate question? Because I have a legitimate answer. Something about storms? I could do that. My legitimate answer is... Oh my god, there's literally a story called Storm-Tossed Salmon in this book. I guess we're sticking with fish. Catching a fish makes you happy. And then you can potentially eat it. Catching a peanut butter cake in the mail also makes one feel very happy. And can feed you for a long time. Maybe too long. It's not very complicated. Alright, you want storm-tossed salmon, or should I dig through my anthology and see if I can find something a little more respectable? It's totally up to you. I don't judge. Respectable? Wait. So not fish. Okay. Hold on. I gotta pick a book that I... Oh, stick with the fish! Okay, cool. Well, that makes my life easy. Alright, storm-tossed salmon. Here we go. Oh my god. Storm-tossed... Storm-tossed... Storm-tossed salmon. There we go. Gotcha. Yes, okay. No, we're at the fish. We're at the fish. Don't worry. I have the fish. The fish? We have fish. Oh my god. You know what emote we still need? When Oxy finishes with school, we really need to nag her about a fishing emote. Yeah. Yeah. I've got to remember to do that. I think it's too much of a meme at this point to let it... Yeah. Yeah, remind me at some point to make some noise in the Discord and have that done. Because she's so good at those emotes, man. Alright, storm-tossed salmon. Even in the most unpromising situations, it's often better just to trust the professionals and go with the flow. Sometimes literally. Very occasionally, This results in the fishing session of a lifetime. Still kind of wanting a Jong one? We should make a list. We should make a list. I think on the server there should be somewhere called like I think it's art ideas. Oh wait, that hasn't been used since 2019. Jesus. Throw that shit in bullshit streamers need. Okay, there we go. Alright. And now, back to our regularly fishing program. Salmon anglers have a seemingly bottomless pit of excuses as to why they can't catch fish. It's either too hot or too cold. The barometric pressure's too high or falling too quickly. It's raining too hard, or there hasn't been any rain at all recently. Or there simply aren't enough fish in the river or lough. And many experienced fishermen will take one look at the weather in the morning and dismiss any chance of taking a fish that day, for any one of myriad reasons. Gillies can be just as bad. For instance, many of them slavishly abide by the old myth that if the morning mist is down over the hills, salmon fishing will be futile. The wind is rarely from the right direction, the river's too high or showing its bones, or the tide out in the bay is all wrong to throw any fresh fish into the river that day. Defeatism can be in the air before a line has been cast. And there are those who say this attitude is transmitted down the line to the fish, which is the ultimate excuse for failing to attract even a sniff of a salmon. The scene was thus set at the breakfast table in marvelous Delphi Lodge in Ireland's County Mayo, at the edge of Connemara. A lot of these are Irish, wow. George and his wife Helen were drinking coffee and eyeing up the branches of the pine trees, being swept around in a ferocious wind, and the rain sheeting horizontally against the windows, as it had been since midnight. They were wondering why they'd even bothered getting out of bed so early on such an obviously lousy day for fishing. The idea of venturing forth into the forlorn hope of catching a salmon in those conditions seemed outrageous. "We're supposed to be on the law this morning," said George, "and Peter will be waiting for us." "What? Just to say don't bother?" "Oh, come on. At least we can show willin'. I'd prefer him to call it off rather than us. Then we can decide what to do with the rest of the day." They donned jackets over trousers, caps and hoods, and walked down to the landing stage at the edge of Finlow. Peter was waiting for them, dressed as though he was about to attempt a walk into the North Pole. And the only thing out of place with the whole scenario was the wide grin across their Gilly's face. "Morning. Ready to go fishing then?" "Ah, Peter, you're joking, aren't you? I wouldn't walk down the river bank, let alone go out in a boat on the law with this lot." "Well, now, I've fished here all my life, and I've not lost an angler yet." God fucking damn it. What did I kick? Oh. That was actually pretty easy to fix. "Well, now, I've fished here all my life, And I've not lost an angler yet. I dare say I'll not be starting with either of you today. Helen winced. Oh, but the wind, Peter, and the rain. Surely no self-respecting salmon's gonna take to these conditions. The grin widened. You'll wait your whole life for a day like this on the salmon. Trust me, the wind's veering into the south, and that alone means it'll be worth a cast or two. Come on now, you're both experienced enough to fish in this. Otherwise, I wouldn't suggest it. It's just a question of confidence. George shuffled his feet, not sure what to do. The whole idea seemed preposterous, and he was completely thrown by Peter's enthusiasm. He'd always been a great gilly for them, and was the first to voice his opinions when the chances were zilch. George was convinced they were less than zilch right now, so what was going on? Okay, Peter, we'll go and fetch the gear, but we'll only stay out for an hour. I'm not contracting pneumonia on a wild salmon chase. And I'll be reminding you about the statement in an hour or so, said Peter, a twinkle in his eye and a grin as wide as it was possible to go. So, 12-pound casts, please, and only 2 flies out there today. Something black and flashy on the point, like a silver stout, and your usual mutter on the bob. Quickly now. Tackling up took time, mainly due to the wind continually catching the nylon in cold, wet fingers refusing to function as normal. Finally, though, they were in the boat, and, hands thrust deeply into pockets and backs to the bow, they set out from the landing stage. Once clear of the headland, the bows dug deep into the waves and sent water cascading into the boat, straight over George and Helen, who were sitting hunched up and trying desperately to stop any leakage down their necks. Thankfully, the trip didn't last long, and soon they were up at the top reed bed. Peter positioned the boat, then cut the engine, went on to the oars, and with George in the stern seat and Helen up in the bows. The first thing George noticed was that Peter's local forecast had turned out to be accurate. The wind had indeed swung from a cold easterly into the warmer south. Even so, the surrounding hills funnel the wind down the Delphi and swirl around Finlaw, making boat handling and casting very difficult in stormy weather. Peter was a past master at holding the boat's drift, but George's first cast was intercepted by a sudden crosswind and collapsed in a spaghetti heap a few yards in front of him. He muttered under his breath with a heartfelt, "What the hell are we doing here?" "Short lines, George," Peter suggested. "The salmon won't worry how close they come to the boat in this wave." George grunted, sorted out his line, and cast again. This time, just long enough for him to work the muddler through the surface. His concentration was fixed firmly on the wake of the fly across the water, when a mouth suddenly appeared and slashed violently at it. There was a tug, but then nothing. "Damn, that was a fish!" he cried out in stunned surprise. Peter laughed. "I told you." "I've got one!" shouted Helen from the bow, and George glanced over to see his wife's single-handed rod bouncing around as she played an energetic salmon adroitly in the heavy wave. She finally brought the fish in behind the boat, and Peter leant over the gunwale to net a bright silver grisly of about 5 pounds, sea lice still attached to its tail wrist. "That was swimming around the bay this morning," said Peter. "It couldn't ask for a fresher salmon off the tide than that." No sooner had Helen's grilsey hit the deck than George had another fish swirl at the muddler, and the rod tip was pulled down sharply as the salmon turned and hit the silver stoat on the point. Even as he played the fish, 3 or 4 grills he head and tailed in the vicinity of the boat, and George had this distinct impression that they were floating in salmon soup. Although Peter had expertly showed the speed of the boat's drift, they were bearing down quickly on the stream that leads to the middle of the river, in which salmon lie when they first come up into the low. Almost every cast resulted in a swirl at the muddler or a pull on the point, much more like trout than salmon fishing. And then both George and Helen were into fish and playing them at the same time. Even Peter now, with all his years of experience at gillying, was getting genuinely excited, trying to control the boat and the net and net 2 grills at the same time. Once those 2 were in the boat, Peter started the engine and motored back to the top drift again. We've been out from the dock about an hour, he shouted above the noise of the engine. I take it we'll be heading back now. George kept a straight face. Well, perhaps just another 10 minutes. Peter laughed and pointed a finger. I told you so. After 3 hours fishing, they landed 10 salmon, hooked and lost a further dozen, and had countless swirls and pulls at the flies, as well as seeing well over 100 fish show on the surface up and down the low. If it had been a trout fishing session, it would have been spectacular enough, but the fact that they were all salmon made it some of the most remarkable fishing ever experienced on the Delphi system. Back on land again, with the rain still hammering down, George shook Peter by the hand. How'd you know that was going to happen? Peter tapped his nose with his finger. I've known 3, maybe 4 days like this in 40 years on the Delphi. The barometer's low, which means the fish shouldn't take at all. But it's the combination of a big spring tide throwing a huge run of fresh salmon into the system, coinciding with a complete change of the wind from cold to warm that did it. And they'll not take like that this afternoon, you know. You've had the best of it, and you'll probably never have fishing like that in your life again. But how did you know the fish would run today? Oh, because I was out in the bay last evening, looking to see whether the mackerel were in yet. And I saw the shoal of salmon there, waiting for the tide. I heard the rain in the night, and I knew they'd be straight through the low river and into the low this morning. And then we'd have just a few hours before they settled into their lies. Believe me, George, very few people ever get to experience fishing like that. George grinned. And there was me thinking it was just down to our fishing skill. Wait. And there was me thinking it was just down to our skill at a fishing a muddler. That's your storm story. These are weirdly satisfying. Why? Why are these so good? They're actually good. Dude, these are better than some of the ghost stories I've read on here. Who wrote this? It doesn't... Wait a second. Paul Knight. Well done, dude. Apparently this dude just spoke to like a shit ton of fisher people and just like wrote down their stories. Some of the best things you come across are done for the meme. Honestly, yeah. I should probably do more of that. I was like, I just saw fishing stories and I was like, alright, this is gonna be like nerd stuff. We'll give it a try, but like, how funny would it be if like Wolfie, the one who's like obsessed with fishing, reads fishing stories during spooky story night? Ha ha ha. And like, you know, whatever. And then like I'm actually enjoying it. What? I bought a book called Man Fuck This House purely for the title, and I've loved every minute of it. Okay. A book titled Man Fuck This House. You know what? I wouldn't have low expectations for that. Because it already takes guts to name a book that. To begin with. God. I need to. What else did this person write? Hold on. Like. I gotta do a search, because, like, what the fuck? Paul Knight. Ah, Freemasonry. What? It has nothing to do with anything. What the fuck? Why is there so much here? Okay, here we go. Yeah, it's like all night stuff. What the heck? I guess it's a different... Oh, because... fuck me, I'm an idiot. His name is Paul Knight. Why am I fucking shocked that it's coming up with night results? You moron. That... I'm dumb. I'm really just... I've lost my mind. Right? And the hilarious part is that I don't think it swears anywhere else in the book except where they use that one line almost all the way at the end. That is amazing. That is actually amazing. Hold on. I'm like on a mission. Okay. Are you kidding me? He didn't write anything else? No! What are you doing, man? You published this in 2011. Have you just been resting on your laurels this whole time? The fuck is wrong with you? Oh my gosh. It's so... they're so satisfying. What the heck? I wasn't expecting them to be. How long have I been streaming? Only an hour and a half? Huh. The published masterpiece is... He published a masterpiece and retired with his riches, pretty much. Purchasin writes a masterpiece, refuses to elaborate further, leaves. You're not wrong, Zerp. Here's this legendary book about fishing with better storytelling than most professional storytellers. That's it. No questions. Just disappears into the fucking ether. Alright, Zerp, it's your turn. What do you want a story about? I'm pretty sure I have more murder fairies somewhere. It's probably in cross-cultural lore. Deep sea stories. Actually, it's funny you ask because I just got a whole bunch of stories around the sea. I just need to find them. Deep sea. Oh, well, if that's the case, let me... I know I have an underwater one. Hold on. Underwater. Okay. Deep sea. Do 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 do. Hauntings at sea. No, hold on. God damn it! I know that I downloaded something. Hold on. Date modified. It should help. Ah, mysterious sea stories. That should give me something. That one horror game I posted in Discord probably awakened a fear I didn't know I had. Probably. Smiles returns from rain and darkness and a fast food hunt. Welcome back, Smiles. I hope you haven't had enough water, because there's more. Okay. Let's see. Exile. Which ship? What goes the captain requested? Finding of the Kraken. Davy Jones is kicked. Undersea Guardians. Alright, let's see. I don't know why I did that. Okay, here we go. Finding stories about the sea, horror stories about the sea, was actually surprisingly difficult. Like, I had to search for a few hours before finding, like, the books that I did. Alright. So this one is Undersea Guardians by Ray Bradbury. Which is one of, like, my dad's favorite authors, actually. The ocean slept quietly. Hold on. It's weird hearing crickets underwater. That needs to be stopped. Okay. The ocean slept quietly. There was little movement in its deep green silence. Along the floor of a watery valley, some bright flecks of orange color swam. Tiny arrow-shaped fish. A shark prowled by, gaping its mouth. An octopus reached up lazily with a tentacle, wiggled it at nothing, and settled back, dark and quiet. Fish swam in and around the rusting Tom Hulk of a submerged cargo ship, in and out of gaping holes and ripped ports. The legend on the prow said USS Atlantic. It was quite soundless, The water formed around the ship like green gelatin. And then Konda came with his recruits. They were swimming like dream motes through the wide, dark-watered valleys of the ocean. Konda at the head of the school, with his red shock of hair flurried upright in a current, and his red bush beard trailed down over the massive ribs of his chest. He put out his great arms, clutched water, pulled back, and his long body shot ahead. The others imitated Konda, and it was very quietly done. The ripple of the white arms, cupped hands, the glimmer of quick-moving feet was like the movement of motion pictures from which the soundtrack has been cut. Just deep, watery silence, and the mute moves of Konda and his swarm. Alita came close at his kicking heels. She swam with her sea-green eyes wide fixed and dark hair spilling back over her naked body. Her mouth twisted with some sort of agony, to which she should give no words. Alita felt something moving at her side. Another smaller woman, very thin in her nakedness, with gray hair and a shriveled husk of a face that held nothing but weariness. She swam too, and would keep on swimming. And then there was Helene, flashing by over their heads like an instantaneous charge of lightning. Helene, with her hot, angry eyes, and her long platinum hair, and her strange laughter. How much longer, Konda? The old woman's thought reached through the waters, touching the brains of them all as they swam. An hour, perhaps only 40 minutes, came Konda's blunt retort. It had the depths of fathoms in it, dark like the tides in the sunken waterlands. "Watch out!" somebody cried. Down through the green waters, overhead something tumbled. A shadow crossed the ocean surface, quick, like a gigantic seagull. "Depth charge!" shouted Konda. "Get away from it!" Like so many frightened fish, the 20 of them scattered instantly, with a flurry of legs, a spreading of arms, a diving of heads. Depth charge ripped water into gouts and shreds, spread terrific vibrations down to kick the sandy bottom, up to ram the surface like a geyser. Alita screamed to herself as she sank, stunned, to the seafloor, a queer, strange pain going through her limbs. If only this were over. If only the real death came. If only it were over. A shivering went through her. Quite suddenly, the water was icy cold, and she was alone in the green emptiness. So very alone. Alone, staring at a dark ring on her left hand. "Richard, I want to see you again, oh so very much. Oh, Richard, if we could only be together." "Daughter." The gentle thought husked at her as the old woman glided up, white hair misting around her wrinkled face. Don't think. Come along, there's work. Work to be done, much of it. Work for you and me, and the ships on the surface, and for Richard. Alita didn't move. I don't want to swim. I'd rather just sit here on the sand and wait. You know you can't do that. The old woman touched her. You'd be all the unhappier. You have a reason to swim, or you wouldn't be swimming. Come along. We're almost there. The effects of the depth charge, dropped from a low-flying airplane, had dispersed. Mud streaks boiled up, fogging the water, and there were a million air bubbles dancing toward the outer world like laughing diamonds. Alita let the old woman take her hand and tug her up from the sand floor. Together they progressed toward Konda, who was the nucleus of a growing congregation. Submarine, somebody thought, in a tense whisper, over that crop of coral overhead. That's why the airplane dropped the depth charge. What kind of submarine? Someone else asked. German, said Konda grimly. His red beard wavered in the water, and the red-rimmed eyes stared out with iron fury. Helene flicked by them all, swiftly, laughing. A German submarine, lying on the bottom, sleeping quietly, waiting for the convoy. Their mind swirled at the words of Konda, like so many warm, cold currents intermixing with fear and apprehension. And the convoy will pass the spot in how long? Half an hour at most now. There isn't much time, is there? Not much. Is it dangerous for us to be near it? What if the airplane returns with more depth charges? Konda growled. This is the limit to the plane range. That plane won't be back. He's out of bombs and out of gas. It's our job now. And what of it? You're afraid? Silence. The ring of faces looked to Konda for the plan. Alita among them. 14 men, 6 women. Men with beards grown out 4 or 5 months. Hair long and unshorn about their ears. Pallid, watery faces with determined bone under skin. Set jaws and tightened fists. All gathered like fragments of some oceanic nightmare. The pallid undead, breathing water, and thinking mute thoughts about the stormy night when the USS Atlantic had been torpedoed and sent to the bottom, with all of them trapped, screaming inside her. We never had our chance, said Konda grimly, to get where we were going and do what we had to do. But we'll go on doing it until the war's over, 'cause that's all that's worthwhile doing. I don't know how we live or what makes us live, except the will to fight, the will to vengeance, wanting to win, not wanting to lie on the coral shells like so much meat for the sharks. Alita listened and shuddered. Why was she still alive and swimming 40 fathoms under? And then she knew. It was like a sudden flame in her. She lived because she loved Richard Jameson. She lived simply because this ship might pass this way. Someday. Soon again. Like it had 3 weeks ago. Returning from England. And she might still see him leaning on the rail, smoking his pipe and trying to smile. Still alive. She lived for that. She lived to keep him safe on every trip. Like the others, she had a purpose. A hot, constricting, unquenchable purpose. To prevent more victims from coming down to join her in the same nightmare fashion as the USS Atlantic. She guessed that explained everything. There was a good reason for her to still be moving, and somehow the gods had motivated them all in the green seaweed plateaus and gullies. Now, said Konda's heavy thought, we've given this German submarine to consider. We have to knock it out of action completely. We can't have it lying here when the convoy comes. Alita jerked. She came out of her thoughts and her pale lips moved. Yes? You know what to do, Alita? And Helene? Helene drifted down dreamily, laughing in answer, and opened white fingers to clutch them tight. It's up to you, Alita and Helene. The rest of us will deploy around the submarine. Jones, you and Meredith try to jam the torpedo openings somehow. Acton, you work on the induction valves. Simpson, see what you can do to the guns on deck, and Haynes, you and the other men try your damnedest with that periscope and conning tower. Yes, sir. Good enough, sir. If we do it, this will be the 6th sub for us. If we do it, said Konda. Alita'll do it for us, won't you, Alita? What? Oh, yes. Yes, I'll do it. She tried to smile. All right, then. Konda swung about. Spread out and go in toward the submarine under smoke screen. Deploy. Silently, the congregation split into 2s and 3s and swam toward the coral shelf around it, then sank to the bottom, scooped up great handfuls of mud and darkened water with it. Alita followed, cold, tired, unhappy. The submarine squatted on the bottom like a metal shark, dark and wary and not making a sound. Seaweed waved drowsy fronds around it, and several curious blue-eyed fish eyed it. Several curious bluefish eyed it and fluttered past. Sunshine slanted down through water, touching the gray bulk, making it look prehistoric, primeval. A veil of mud sprang up as the cordon of Konda's people closed around the U-boat. Through this veil, their pasty bodies twisted, naked and quick. Alita's heart spasmed its cold, gray flesh inside her. It beat salt water through her arteries. It beat agony through her veins. There, just a few feet from her, through the mud veil lay an iron womb. And inside it, grown-up children stirred, living. And out here in the cold deeps, nothing lived but the fish. Konda and Alita and the others didn't count. The submarine, a metal womb, nurturing these men, keeping the choking, hungry waters from them. What a difference a few inches of metal made between pink flesh and her own white flesh, between living and not living, between laughing and crying. All of that air inside the submarine. What would it be like to gasp in it again, like the old days just a few scant weeks ago? What would it be to suck it in, mouth it out with talked words on it, to talk again? Alita grimaced. She kicked her legs. Plunging to the U-boat, she beat her fists against it, screaming. Let me in! Let me in! I'm out here and I want to live. Let me in! Alita! The old woman's voice cried in her mind. A shadow drew across her lined face, softening it. No, no, my child. Do not think of it. Think only of what must be done. Alita's face was ugly with torture. Just one breath. Just one song. Time shortens, Alita, and the convoy comes. The submarine must be smashed. Now. Yes, said Alita wearily. Yes, I must think of Richard. If he should happen to be in this next convoy. Her dark hair surged in her face. She brushed it back with white fingers and stopped thinking about living again. It was needless torture. She heard Helene's laughter from somewhere. It made her shiver. She saw Helene's nude body flash above her like a silver fish, magnificent and graceful as a wind-borne thistle. Her laughter swam with her. Open the U-boat up. Open it up and let them out. Oh, I'm not saying that next bit. How do I paraphrase that? Open it up and let them out, and I'll have carnal relations with a German boy. There we go. That's adequate. There were lights in the submarine. Dim lights. We're not having another fish craziness again, Sassy. I know where your head's at. I learned my lessons. I learned them well. How the fuck does this happen? I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. There were lights in the submarine. Dim lights. Alita pressed her pale face against the port and stared into a crew's quarters. 2 German men lay on small bunks, looking at the iron ceiling, doing nothing. After a while, one puckered his lips, whistled, and rolled out of the bunk to disappear through the small iron door. Alita nodded. This was the way she wanted it. The other man was very young and very nervous. His eyes were erratic in a tired face, and his hair was corn yellow and clipped tight to his head. He twisted his hands together, again and again, and a muscle in his cheek kept jerking. Oof. Light and life. A matter of inches away. Alita felt the cold press of the ocean all around her, the beckoning urge of the cold swells. Oh, just to be inside, living and talking like them. She raised her tiny fist, the one with Richard's thick ring on it, from Annapolis, and struck at the port. She struck 4 times. No effect. She tried again, and knew that Helene would be doing the same on the opposite side of the sub. The Annapolis ring clicked against the thick port glass. Jerking, the German lad pulled his head up half an inch and stared at the port, and looked away again. Went back to twisting his fingers and wetting his lip with his tongue. I'm out here! Alita struck again and again. Listen to me. Listen, I'm out here. The German sat up so violently he cracked his head against metal. Holding his forehead with one hand, he slipped out of the bunk and stepped to the port. He squinted out, cupping hands over eyes to see better. Alida smiled. She didn't feel like smiling, but she smiled. Sunlight sprang down upon her dark smoke spirals of hair, dancing on the water. Sunlight illuminated her naked white body. She beckoned with her hands, laughing. For one unbelieving, stricken instant, it was as if hands strangled the German lad. His eyes grew out from his face like unhealthy gray things. His mouth stopped retching and froze. Something crumbled inside him. It seemed to be the last one thing to strike his mind, once and for all insane. One moment there, the next he was gone. Alida watched him fling himself back from the port, screaming words she couldn't hear. Her heart pounded. He fought to the door, staggering out. She swam to the next port in time to see him shout into the midst of a sweating trio of mechanics. He stopped, swayed, swallowed, pointed back to the bunker room, and while the others turned to stare in the designated direction, the young German ran on, his mouth wide, to the entrance rungs of the conning tower. Alida knew what he was yelling. She spoke little German. She'd heard nothing, but faintly the waves of his mind impinged on hers, a screaming insanity. God, oh God, she's outside, and she's swimming, and alive. The sub-captain saw him coming. He dragged out a revolver and fired, point blank. The shot missed, and the two grappled. God, oh God, I can't stand it any longer. Months of sleeping under the sea. Let me out of this goddamned nightmare. Let me out. Stop. Stop it, Schmidt. Stop. The captain fell under a blow. The young man wrested the gun from him, shot 3 times. Then he jumped on the rungs to the coming tower and twisted at mechanisms. Alida warned the others. Be ready. One is coming out. He's coming out. He's opening the inner door. Instantly, breathlessly, passionately, Helene's voice rang. To hell with the inner door. It's the outer door we want open. God in heaven, let me out. I can't stay below. Stop him. The crew scrambled. Ringing down, the inner door peeled open. 3 Germanic faces betrayed the biting fear at their bellies. They grabbed instruments and threw them at Schmidt's vanishing legs, jumping up the rungs. Konda's voice clashed like a thrust gong in the deep sunlit waters. Ready, everyone? If it gets the outer door open, we must force in to stop the others from ever closing it. Helen laughed her knifing laughter. I'm ready. The submarine stirred and rolled to a strange gurgling sound. Young Schmidt was babbling and crying. To Alida, he was now out of sight. The other men were pouring pistol shots up into the conning tower, where he'd vanished, to no effect. They climbed after him, shouting. A gout of water hammered down, crushed them. It's open, Helene exulted. It's open. The outer seal is free. Don't let them slam it again, roared Konda. White bodies shot by, flashing green in the sunlight. Thoughts darkened, veiling like unsettled mud. Inside the machine room, the crew staggered in a sloshing, belching nightmare of thrusting water. There was churning and thrashing and shaking, like the interior of a gigantic washing machine. 2 or 3 crewmen struggled up the rungs to the inner lock and beat at the closing mechanism. I'm inside. Helen's voice was high, excited. I've got him. The German boy. Oh, not reading that. She's very excited about the German boy. Let's just leave it at that. There was a terrific mental scream from the German, and then silence. A moment later, his dangling legs appeared half in, half out of the lock, as the door started to seal. Now it couldn't seal. Yanking desperately, the crew beneath tried to free him of the lock, but Helene laughed dimly and said, Oh no, I've got him and I'm keeping him here, where he'll do the most good. He's mine. Very much mine. You can't have him back. Water thundered, spewed. The Germans floundered. Schmidt's limbs kicked wildly, with no life, in the steadily descending torrent. Something happened to release him. The lock rapped open, and he fell face down into the rising waters. Something came with him. Something white and quick and naked. Helene. Aleta watched in a numb sort of feeling, but was too weary to be horror. She watched until there were 3 Germans left, swimming about, keeping their heads above water, yelling to God to save them. And Helene was in among them, invisible and stroking and moving quickly. Her white hands flickered up, grasped one officer by the shoulders, and pulled him steadily under. Oh God, nope, I'm skipping that. She's... To fill you in, she's making sexual overtures, asking if she is desirable, and basically soliciting sex. Helene has just lost it. Alita swam off, shuddering, away from the fury and yelling and corruption. The submarine was dying, shaking its prehistoric bulk with metal agony. In another moment it would be drowned, and the job done. Silence would come down again, and sunlight would strike on the dead, quiet U-boat, and another attack would be successful. This is a curse, I say. I'm pretty sure someone has hexed me with, like, an inability to get away from whatever fucking genre of erotica this is. Trust me when I say I do not seek it out. I do not know how it comes, but it does. Oh, and that's not a pun for the internet to enjoy. Okay. Freakish fish lady sex. I don't know why it keeps happening. This is like the 2nd time at least. Sobbing, Alita swam up toward the sun in the green silence. It was late afternoon, and the water became warmer as she neared the surface. Late afternoon. Back in Forest Hills, they'd be playing tennis now on the hot courts, drinking cool cocktails, talking about dancing tonight at the Indigo Club. Back in Forest Hills, they'd be deciding what formal to wear tonight to the dance, what show to see. Oh, so long ago, in the sanity of living, in the time before torpedoes crushed the hull of the USS Atlantic and took her down. Richard, where are you now? Will you be here in a few minutes, Richard, with the convoy? Will you be thinking of us on the day we kissed goodbye in New York at the harbor? When I was on my way to nursing service in London? Will you remember how we kissed and held tight? And how you never saw me again? I saw you, Richard. 3 weeks ago. When you passed by on the destroyer 242. Oblivious to me floating a few feet under the water. If only we could be together. But I wouldn't want you to be like this. White and sodden and not alive. I want to keep you from all this, darling. And I shall. That's why I stay moving, I guess. Because I know I can help you keep living. We just killed a submarine, Richard. It won't have a chance to harm you. You'll have a chance to go to Britain. To do the things we wanted to do together. There was a gentle movement in the water, and the old woman was at her side. Alita's white shoulders jerked. It was awful. The old woman looked at the sun caught in the liquid. It always is, this kind of death. It always has been. Always will be, as long as men are at war. We had to do it. We didn't take lives, we saved lives. Hundreds of them. Alita closed her eyes and opened them again. I've been wondering about us. Why is it that just you and I and Kanda and Helene and a few others survived the sinking? Why didn't some of the hundreds of others join us? What are we? The old woman moved her feet slowly, rippling the currents. We're guardians. That's what you would call us. 1,000 people drowned when the Atlantic went down. But 20 of us came out, half dead, because we have somebody to guard. You have a lover on the convoy routes. I have 4 sons in the Navy. The others have similar obligations. Kanda has sons too. And Helene, well, her lover was drowned inside the Atlantic and never came half alive like us, so she's vindictive, motivated by a great vengeance. She can't ever really be killed. We all have a stake in the convoys that cross and recross the ocean. We're not the only ones. Maybe there are thousands of others who cannot and will not rest between here and England, breaking seams in German cargo boats, darkening Nazi periscopes and frightening German crewmen, sinking their gunboats when the chances come. But we're all the same. Our love for our husbands and sons and daughters and fathers make us go on when we should be meat for fish. Make us go on being guardians of the convoy. Gives us the ability to swim faster than any human ever swam while living. As fast as any fish ever swam. Invisible guardians no one will ever know about or appreciate. Our urge to do our bit was so great, we wouldn't let dying put us out of action. I'm tired, though, said Alita. So very tired. When the war is over, we'll rest. In the meanwhile, the convoy is coming. Oh, sorry. In the meanwhile, the convoy is coming. It was Kanda's deep voice of authority. used to giving captain's orders for years aboard the Atlantic. He appeared below them now, about 100 yards away, striving up in the watered sunlight, his red hair aflame about his big-nosed, thick-lipped face. His beard was like many living tentacles, writhing. The convoy. The Guardians stopped whatever they were doing and hung suspended like insects in some green, primordial amber, listening to the deeps. From far, far off it came, the voice of the convoy. First a dim note, a lazy drifting of sound, like trumpets blown into eternity and lost in the wind. A dim vibration of propellers beating water, a bulking of much weight, and the sun-sparkled Atlantic tides. The convoy. Destroyers, cruisers, corvettes, and cargo ships. The great, bulking convoy. Richard, are you with them? Alita breached water in her nostrils, down her throat and her lungs. She hung like a pearl against a green velvet gown that rose and fell under the breathing of the sea. The echo of the ships became more than a suggestion. The water began to hum and dance and tremble with the advancing armada, bearing munitions and food and planes, bearing hopes and prayers and people. The convoy churned for England. Richard Jameson. The ships would come by like so many heavy blue shadows over their heads, pass on and be lost soon in the night time, and tomorrow there would be another and another stream of them. Alita would swim with them for a way, until she was tired of swimming perhaps, and she would drop down, come floating back here to the spot on a deep water tide she knew and utilized for the purpose. Now excitedly she shot upward. She went as near to the surface as she could, hearing Conda's thunderous commands. Spread out. One of you to each major ship. Report any hostile activity to me instantly. We'll trail with them until after sunset. Spread. The others obeyed, rising to position, ready. Not near enough to the surface so the sun could get at their flesh. They waited. The hammer, churn, churn of the ships folded and grew upon itself. The sea brimmed with its bellow, going down to kick the sand and rising up in reflected quivers of sound. Hammer, churn. Richard Jameson. Alita dared raise her head above the water. The sun hit her like a dull hammer. Her eyes flicked, searching. As she sank down again, she cried. Richard, it's this ship, the first destroyer. I recognize the number. He's here again. Alita, please, cautioned the old woman. Control yourself. My boy, too. He's on one of the cargo ships. I know its propeller voice well. I recognize the sound. One of my boys is here near me, and it feels so very good. The whole score of them swam to meet the convoy. Only Helene stayed behind. Swimming around and around the German U-boat, swimming swiftly and laughing her strange high laugh that wasn't sane. Alita felt something like elation rising in her. It was good, just to be this close to Richard, even if she couldn't speak or show herself or kiss him ever again. She'd watch him every time he came by this way. Perhaps she'd swim all night now and part of the next day, until she couldn't keep up with him any longer. And then she'd whisper goodbye and let him sail on alone. The destroyer cut close to her. She saw its number on the prow, in the sun. And the sea sprang aside as the destroyer cut through it like a glittering knife. There was a moment of exhilaration, and then Konda shouted it deep and loud and excited. Submarine! Submarine coming from north, cutting across convoy. German! Richard! Alada's body twisted fearfully as she heard the underwater vibration that meant submarine was coming in toward them, fast. A long, dark shadow pulsed underwater. There was nothing you can do to stop a moving submarine, unless you were lucky. You could try stopping it by jamming its propellers, but there wasn't time for that. Konda yelled, "Close in on the sub. Try to stop it somehow. Block the periscope. Do anything." But the German U-boat gnashed in, like a mercurial monster. In the breadths it was lined up with the convoy, unseen, and squaring off to release its torpedoes. Down below, like some deep-moving fantasy, Helen swam eccentric circles, but as the sub-shadow trailed over her, she snapped her face up, her hot eyes pulled wide, and she launched herself with terrific energy up at it, her face blaring with fury. The ships of the convoy moved on, all unaware of the poisoned waters they churned, their great valvular hearts pounding, their screws thrashing a wild water song. Konda, do something. Konda. Alata shivered as her mind thrust the thoughts out at the red-bearded giant. Konda moved like a magnificent shark up toward the propellers of the U-boats, swift and angry. Squirting, bubbling, jolting, the sub expelled a child of force, a streamlined torpedo that kicked out of its metal womb, trailed by a second, launched with terrific impetus at the destroyer. Alata kicked with her feet. She grasped at the veils of water with helpless fingers, blew all the water from her lungs in a stifled scream. Things happened swiftly. She had to swim at incredible speed just to keep pace with the submarine and convoy, and spinning a bubbled trail of web, the torpedoes coursed to the destroyer as Alata swam her frantic way. It missed. Both torps missed. Someone cried. It sounded like the old woman. Oh, Richard, Richard, don't you know the sub is near you? Don't let it bring you down to this, Richard. Drop the depth charges. Drop them now. Nothing. Konda clung to the conning tower of the U-boat, cursing with elemental rage, striving uselessly. 2 more torpedoes issued from the mouths of the sub and went surging on their trajectories. Maybe. Missed again. Alata was gaining, getting closer to the destroyer. If only she could leap from the water, shouting. If only she were something else but this dead white flash. Another torpedo. The last one probably in the sub. It was going to hit. Alata knew that before she'd taken 3 strokes more. She swam exactly along the destroyer now. The submarine was many, many yards ahead when it let loose its last explosive. She saw it come, shining like some new kind of fish, and she knew its range was correct this time. In an instant, she knew what there was to be done. In an instant, she knew the whole purpose and destiny of her swimming, and her being only half dead. It meant the end of swimming forever now. The end of thinking about Richard, and never having him for herself ever again. And then she kicked her heels to face the water, stroked ahead, clean, quick. The torpedo came directly at her with its blunt, ugly nose. Alida coasted, spread her arms wide, waited to embrace it, take it into her breast like a long-lost lover. She shouted it out in her mind. Helene, Helene, from now on, take care of Richard for me. Watch over him for me. Take care of Richard. Submarine off starboard. Ready depth charges. Torpedo traces, 4 of them missed us. Here comes another one. They've got our range this time, Jameson. Watch it. To the men on the bridge, it was the last moment before hell. Richard Jameson stood there with his teeth clenched, yelling hard over, but it was no use. That torp was coming on, not caring, not looking where it was going. It would hit them amidship. Jameson's face went white all over, and he breathed under his breath and clutched the rail. The torpedo never reached the destroyer. It exploded about 100 feet from the destroyer's hull. Jameson fell to the deck, swearing. He waited. He staggered up moments later, helped by his junior officer. Well, that was a close one, sir. What happened? That torp had our range, sir, but they must have put a faulty mechanism in her. She exploded short of her goal. Struck a submerged log or something. Jameson stood there with salt spraying his face. I thought I saw something before the explosion. It looked like a log. Yeah, that was it. A log. Lucky for us, huh, sir? Yeah, damn lucky. Depth charge. Toss 'em. Depth charges were dropped. Moments later, a subwater explosion tore up the water. Oil bubbled up to color the waves, with bits of wreckage mixed in with it. We got the sub, someone said. Yeah, the sub almost got us. The destroyer ran in the wave channels, in the free wind, under a darkening sky. Full speed ahead. The ocean slept quiet as the convoy moved on in the twilight. There was little movement in the deep green silence, except for some things that may have been a swarm of silver fish gathered below, just under the waters, where the convoy had passed. Pale things stirring, flashing a flash of white, and swimming off silently, strangely, into the deep green soundlessness of the undersea valleys. The ocean slept again. God, that was fucking sad. I hope that was a good story, Azurp. It was definitely deep sea. There gotta be more stories like that. I wonder if they're like spooky ocean stories. You liked it? Good. Good. Alright. I've still got a little bite left in me. Let's do one more for the road, eh? Is this the book with it found on it? Oh yeah, the first one is Poe. Sassy is still here? Oh god, how long is this? Oh, not too bad. Sassy, it's your favorite. Sassy! I'll only read it if she's here. If not, I'll switch to something easy. Okay, good. This is message found in a bottle? MS period found in a bottle? I'm not sure. Alright. Here we go. Of my country and my family I have little to say. Ill usage and length of years have driven me from the one and estranged me from the other. Hereditary wealth afforded me an education of no common order, and a contemplative turn of mind enabled me to methodize the stores, which early study very diligently garnered up. Beyond all things, the works of German moralists gave me great delight, not from any ill-advised admiration of their eloquent madness, but from the ease with which my habits of rigid thought enabled me to detect their falsities. I have often been reproached with the aridity of my genius. A deficiency in imagination has been imputed to me as a crime, and the Pyrrhonism of my opinions at all times rendered me notorious. Indeed, a strong relish for my physical philosophy has, I fear, tinctured my mind with the very common error of this age. I mean the habit of referring occurrences, even the least susceptible of such reference, to the principles of that science. Upon the whole, no person could be less liable than myself to be led away from the severe precincts of truth by the ignes fatui of superstition. I have thought proper to premise this much, lest the incredible tale I have to tell should be considered rather the raving of a crude imagination than the positive experience of a mind, to which the reveries of fantasy have been a dead letter of nullity. After many years spent in foreign travel, I sailed in the year 18 from the port of Batavia, in the rich and populous island of Java, on a voyage to the archipelago of the Sunda Islands. I went as a passenger, having no other inducement than a kind of nervous restlessness which haunted me as a fiend. Our vessel was a beautiful ship of about 400 tons, copper-fastened and built at Bombay of Malabar teak. She was freighted with cotton wool and oil from the Lachadive Islands. We had also an on-board choir, jaggery ghee, coconuts, and a few cases of opium. The stowage was clumsily done, and the vessel consequently crank. We got under way with a mere breath of wind, and for many days stood along the eastern coast of Java, without any other incident to beguile the monotony of our course than the occasional meeting with some small grabs of the archipelago, to to which we were bound. One evening, leaning over the taffrail, I observed a very singular isolated cloud to the northwest. 'Twas remarkable, as for its colour, as from its being the first we had seen since our departure from Batavia. I watched it attentively until sunset, when it spread all at once to the east wind and westward. When it spread all at once to the eastward and westward, girding the horizon with a narrow strip of vapor, and looking like a long line of low beach. My notice was soon afterwards attracted by the dusky red appearance of the moon, and the peculiar character of the sea. The latter was undergoing a rapid change, and the water seemed more than unusually transparent. Although I could distinctly see the bottom, yet, heaving the lead, I found the ship in 15 fathoms. The air now became intolerably hot, and was loaded with spiral exhalations similar to those arising from heated iron. As the night came on, every breath of wind died away, and a more entire calm it is impossible to conceive. The flame of a candle burned upon... I'm sorry, what? The flame of a candle burned upon the poop? And now, for the next episode of Does That Word Mean What I Think It Means? Poop definition. The aftermost and highest deck of a ship, especially in a sailing ship where it typically forms the roof of the cabin in the stern. Yeah, that should have been where my mind went, but that isn't where it went. The flame of a candle burned upon the poop, without the least perceptible motion, and a long hair, held between the finger and thumb, hung without the possibility of detecting a vibration. Yes, the poop deck, but it just used the word poop, and so it's just like, the candle burned upon the poop? Why? No, I got it now. We're all good. However, as the captain said, he could perceive no indication of danger, and as we were drifting in bodily to shore, he ordered the sails to be furled, and the anchor let go. No watch was set, and the crew, consisting principally of Malays, stretched themselves deliberately upon deck. I went below, not without a full presentiment of evil. Indeed, every appearance warranted me in apprehending a simoom. I told the captain my fears, but he paid no attention to what I said, and left me without deigning to give it a reply. My uneasiness, however, prevented me from sleeping, and about midnight I went upon deck. As I placed my foot upon the upper step of the companion ladder, I was startled by a loud humming noise, like that occasioned by the rapid revolution of the mill wheel. And before I could ascertain its meaning, I found the ship quivering to its center. In the next instant, a wildness of foam hurled us onto our beam ends, and rushing over us fore and aft, swept the entire decks from stern to stern. The extreme fury of the blast proved, in great measure, the salvation of the ship. Although completely waterlogged, yet, as her masts had gone by the board, she rose after a minute, heavily from the sea, and, staggering a while beneath the immense pressure of the tempest, finally righted. By what miracle I escaped destruction it is impossible to say. Stunned by the shock of the water, I found myself upon recovery, jammed in between stem post and rudder. With great difficulty I gained my feet, and, looking dizzily around, was at first struck with the idea of our being among breakers. So terrific, beyond the wildest imagination, was the whirlpool of mountainous and foaming ocean, within which we were engulfed. After a while, I heard the voice of an old Swede, who had shipped with us at the moment of our leaving port. I hallooed to him with all my strength, and presently he came reeling aft. We soon discovered that we were the sole survivors of the accident. All on deck, with the exception of ourselves, had been swept overboard. The captain and the mates must have perished as they slept, for the cabins were deluged with water. Without assistance, we could expect to do little for the security of the ship, and our exertions were at first paralyzed by the momentary expectation of going down. Our cable had, of course, parted like a pack thread at the first breath of hurricane, or we should have been instantly overwhelmed. We scudded with frightful velocity before the sea, and the water made clear breaches over us. The framework of our stern was shattered excessively, and in almost every respect we had received considerable injury. But to our extreme joy, we found the pumps unchoked, and that we had made no great shifting of our ballast. The main fury of the blast had already blown over, and we apprehended little danger from the violence of the wind, but we looked forward to its total cessation with dismay, well believing that in our shattered condition we should inevitably perish in the tremendous swell which would ensue. But this very just apprehension seemed by no means likely soon be verified. For 5 entire days and nights, during which our only subsistence was a small quantity of jaggery procured with great difficulty from the forecastle, the hulk flew at a rate-defying computation of rapidly succeeding flaws of wind which, without equaling the first violence of the simoom, were still more terrific than any tempest I had before encountered. Our course for the first 4 days was within trifling variations of southeast and by south, and we must have run down the coast of New Holland. On the 5th day, the cold became extreme, although the wind had hauled round a point more to the northward. The sun arose with a sickly yellow luster, and clambered a very few degrees above the horizon, emitting no decisive light. There were no clouds apparent, yet the wind was upon the increase, and blew with a fitful and unsteady fury. About noon, as nearly as we could guess, our attention was again arrested by the appearance of the sun. It gave out no light, properly so called, but a dull and sullen glow without reflection, as if all of its rays were polarized just before sinking within the turgid sea. Its central fires suddenly went out, as if hurriedly extinguished by some unaccountable power. 'Twas a dim, silver-like rim alone, as it rushed down the unfathomable ocean. We waited in vain for the arrival of the 6th day. That day, to me, has not arrived. To the Swede, never did arrive. Thenceforward, we were enshrouded in pitchy darkness, so that we could not have seen an object at 20 paces from the ship. Eternal night continued to envelop us, all unrelieved by the phosphoric sea brilliancy to which we had been accustomed in the tropics. We observed, too, that, although the tempest continued to rage with an unabated violence, it was no longer to be discovered the usual appearance of surf foam, which had hitherto attended us. All around were horror, and thick gloom, and a black, sweltering desert of ebony. Superstitious terror crept by degrees into the spirit of the old Swede, and my own soul was wrapped up in silent wonder. We neglected all care of the ship as worse than useless, and securing ourselves as well as possible to the stump of the mizzen-mast, looked out bitterly into the world of ocean. We had no means of calculating time, nor could we form any guesses of our situation. We were, however, well aware of having made farther to the southward than any previous navigators, and felt great amazement at not meeting with the usual impediments of ice. In the meantime, every moment threatened to be our last. Every mountainous billow hurried to overwhelm us. The swell surpassed anything I had imagined possible, and that we were not instantly buried is a miracle. My companion spoke of the lightness of our cargo, and reminded me of the excellent qualities of my ship, but I could not help feeling the utter hopelessness of hope itself, and prepared myself gloomily for that death which I thought nothing could defer beyond an hour, as, with every knot of the way the ship made, the swelling of the black, stupendous seas became more dismally appalling. At times we grasped for breath. At an elevation beyond the albatross, at times became dizzy with the velocity of our descent into some watery hell, where the air grew stagnant, and no sound disturbed the slumbers of the kraken. We were at the bottom of one of these abysses, when a quick scream from my companion broke fearfully upon the night. "See, see!" cried he, shrieking in my ears. "Almighty God! See, see!" As he spoke, I became aware of a dull, sudden glare of red light, which streamed down the sides of the vast chasm where we lay, and threw a fitful brilliancy upon our deck. Casting my eyes upward, I beheld a spectacle which froze the current of my blood. At a terrific height directly above us, on the very verge of the precipitous descent, hovered a gigantic ship, perhaps 4,000 tons. Although upreared upon the summit of a wave more than 100 times her own altitude, her apparent size still exceeded that of any ship of the line or East Indiaman in existence. Her huge hull was a deep, dingy black, unrelieved by any of the customary carvings of a ship. A single row of brass cannon protruded from her open ports, and dashed from their polished surfaces the fires of innumerable battle lanterns, which swung to and fro about her rigging. But what mainly inspired us with horror and astonishment was that she bore up under a press of sail in the very teeth of that supernatural sea, in that ungovernable hurricane. When we first discovered her, her bows were alone to be seen. Not bows. Her bows were alone to be seen, and she rose slowly from the dim and horrible gulf beyond her. For a moment of intense terror, she paused upon the giddy pinnacle, as if in contemplation of her own sublimity, then trembled and tottered, and came down. At this instant I know not what sudden self-possession came over my spirit. Staggering as far aft as I could, I waited fearlessly for the ruin that was to overwhelm. Our own vessel was at length ceasing from her struggles, and sinking her with head to the sea. And sinking with her head to the sea. The shock of the descending mass struck her, consequently, in that portion of her frame which was already under water, and the inevitable result was to hurl me, with irresistible violence, upon the rigging of the stranger. As I fell, the shop hove in stays and went about, and to the confusion ensuing, I attributed my escape from the notice of the crew. With little difficulty I made my way and perceived the main hatchway, which was partially open, and soon found an opportunity of secreting myself in the hold. Why I did so, I can hardly tell. An indefinite sense of awe, which at first sight of the navigators of the ship had taken hold of my mind, was perhaps the principle of my concealment. I was unwilling to trust myself with a race of people who had offered to the cursory glance I had taken so many points of vague novelty, doubt, and apprehension. I therefore thought proper to contrive a hiding place in the hold. This I did by removing a small portion of the shifting boards in such a manner as to afford me convenient retreat between the two huge timbers of the ship. Between the huge timbers of the ship. I had scarcely completed my work when a footstep in the hold forced me to make use of it. A man passed by my place of concealment with feeble and unsteady gait. I could not see his face, but had an opportunity of observing his general appearance. There was about it an evidence of great age and infirmity. His knees tottered beneath a load of years, and his entire frame quivered under burden. He muttered to himself in a low, broken tone some words of a language I could not understand, and groped in a corner. I think that says corner, and groped in a corner among a pile of singular-looking instruments and decayed charts of navigation. His manner was a wild mixture of the peevishness of a second childhood and the solemn dignity of a god. He at length went on deck, and I saw him no more. A feeling for which I have no name has taken possession of my soul, a sensation which will admit of no analysis, to which the lessons of bygone times are inadequate, and for which I fear futurity itself would offer me no key, to a mind constituted like my own, the latter consideration is nihil. I shall never know that I shall never be satisfied with regard to the nature of my conceptions. Yet, it is not wonderful that these conceptions are indefinite, since they have those origins and sources so utterly novel. A new sense, a new entity is added to my soul. Ha, I know that feel. Sha. It's a long time. It is a long time since I first trod the deck of this terrible ship. And the rays of my destiny are, I think, gathering to a focus. Incomprehensible men, wrapped up in meditations of a kind which I cannot divine. They pass me by unnoticed. Concealment is utter folly on my plan. Concealment is utter folly on my plan, for the people will not set. It was but just now that I passed directly before the eyes of the maid. It was no long while ago that I ventured into the captain's own private cabin, and took thence the materials with which I write, and have written. I shall from time to time continue this journal. It is true that I might not find an opportunity of transmitting it to the world, but I will not fail to make the endeavor. At the last moment I will enclose the MS in a bottle and cast it within the sea. An incident has occurred which has given me new room for meditation. Are such things the operation of ungoverned chance? I had ventured upon deck and thrown myself down, without attracting any notice, among a pile of ratline stuff and old sails, in the bottom of the yawl. While musing upon the singularity of my fate, I unwillingly daubed with a tarbrush the edges of a neatly folded studding sail which lay near me on a barrel. The studding sail is now bent upon the ship, and the thoughtless touches of the brush are spread out into the word Discovery. I've made many observations lately upon the structure of the vessel. Although well armed, she is not, I think, a ship of war. Her rigging, build, and general equipment, all negative, a supposition of this kind. What she is not, I can easily perceive. What she is, I fear, is impossible to say. I know not how it is, but in scrutinizing her strange model and singular cast of spars, her huge size and overgrown suits of canvas, her severely simple bow, and antiquated stem, these will occasionally flash across my mind a sensation of familiar things. There is always mixed up with such indistinct shadows of recollection of an unaccountable memory of old foreign chronicles and ages long ago. I have been looking at the timbers of the ship. She's built of a material to which I am a stranger. There's a particular character about the wood which strikes me as rendering it unfit for the purpose to which it has been applied. I mean its extreme porousness, considered independently of the worm-eaten condition which is a consequence of navigation in these seas, and apart from the rottenness attendant upon age. It will appear, perhaps, an observation somewhat over-curious, but this wood would have every characteristic of Spanish oak if Spanish oak were distended by any unnatural means. In reading the above sentence, a curious apothegm of old weather-beaten Dutch navigator comes upon my full recollection. It is as sure, he was wont to say, when any doubt was entertained of his veracity, as sure as there is sea, the ship itself will grow in bulk like the living body of the seaman. I'm not sure what that sentence means, but okay. About an hour ago, I made bold to thrust myself among a group of crew. They paid me no matter of attention, and although I stood in the very midst of them all, seemed utterly unconscious of my presence. Like the one I had first seen in the hold, they all bore about them the marks of hoary old age. Their knees trembled with infirmity. Their shoulders were bent double with decrepitude. Their shriveled skins rattled in the wind. Their voices were low, tremulous and broken. Their eyes glistened with the ruin of years, and their grey hair streamed terribly in the tempest. Around them, on every part of the deck, lay scattered mathematical instruments of the most quaint and obsolete construction. I mentioned some time ago the bending of the studding sail. From that period, the ship, being thrown dead off the wind, has continued her terrific course due south, with every rag of canvas packed upon her, from her trucks to her lower studding sail booms, and rolling every moment her top-gallant yard-arms into the most appalling hell of water which it can enter into the mind of man to imagine. I've just left deck, where I find it impossible to maintain a footing, although the crows seem to experience little inconvenience. It appears to me a miracle of miracles that our enormous bulk is not swallowed up once and forever, nor surely doomed to hover continually upon the brink of eternity, without taking a final plunge into the abyss. From billows 1,000 times more stupendous than I have ever seen, we glide away with the facility of the arrowy seagull. The colossal waters rear their heads above us like demons of the deep, but like demons confined to their simple threats and forbidden to destroy. I'm led to attribute these frequent escapes only to the natural cause, which can account for such effect. I must suppose the ship to be within the influence of some strong current or impetuous undertow. I've seen the captain face to face, and in his own cabin, but as I expected, he paid me no attention, although in his appearance there is to a casual observer nothing which might bespeak him more or less than man. Still, a feeling of irrepressible reverence and awe mingled with the sensation of wonder with which I regarded him. In stature, he's nearly my own height. That is, about 5 feet 8 inches. He is of a well-knit and compact frame of body, neither robust or remarkable otherwise. But it is the singularity of the expression which reigns upon his face. It is the intense, the wonderful, the thrilling evidence of old age. So utter, so extreme, which excites within my spirit a sentiment ineffable. His forehead, although a little wrinkled, seems to bear upon it the stamp of a myriad of years. His grey hairs are records of the past, and his greyer eyes are sibyls of the future. The cabin floor was thickly strewn with the strange iron-clasped folios, and the mouldering instruments of science, and the obsolete, long-forgotten charts. His head was bowed down upon his hands, and he pored with a fiery, unquiet eye over a paper which I took to be a commission, and which, at all events, bore the signature of a monarch. He muttered to himself, as did the first seaman whom I saw in the hold, some low, peevish syllables of a foreign tongue, and although the speaker was as close at my elbow, His voice seemed to reach my ears from the distance of a mile. The ship and all in it are imbued with the spirit of Eld. The crew glide to and fro like the ghosts of the buried centuries. Their eyes have an eager and uneasy meaning. And when their figures fall athwart my path in the wild glare of the battle lanterns, I feel as I've never felt before. Although I have been all my life a dealer in antiquities, and have imbibed the shadows of the fallen calms of the Baalbec, and Tadmor, and Persepolis, until my soul has become ruin. When I look around me, I feel ashamed of my former apprehensions. If I tremble to the blast which hitherto attended us, shall I not stand aghast at a warring of wind and ocean to convey any idea of which the words tornado and simoom are trivial and ineffective? In all the immediate vicinity of the ship is the blackness of eternal night, and a chaos of foamless water. But about a league on either side of us may be seen indistinctly, and at intervals, stupendous ramparts of ice towering away into the desolate sky, and looking like the walls of the universe. As I imagined, the ship proves to be in a current, if that appellation can be properly given to a tide which, howling and shrieking by the white ice, thunders on to the southward with a velocity like the headlong dashing of a cataract. To conceive the horror of my sensations is, I presume, utterly impossible. Yet a curiosity to penetrate the mysteries of those awful regions predominates even over my despair, and will reconcile me to the most hideous aspect of death. 'Tis evident that we are hurrying onwards to some exciting knowledge, some never to be imparted secret, whose attainment is destruction. Perhaps this current leads to the South Pole itself. It must be confessed that a supposition apparently so wild has every probability in its favor. The crew pace the deck with unquiet and tremulous step, but there is upon their countenances an expression more of the eagerness of hope than the apathy of despair. In the meantime, the wind is still in our poop. Come on, Wolfie, don't be 12. Come on, Wolfie. The wind is still in our poop. As we carry a crowd of canvas, the ship is at times God damn it. No. Oh, no. Oh, we were almost done. We carry a crowd of canvas. The ship is at times lifted bodily from out of the sea. Oh, horror upon horror. The ice opens suddenly to the right and to the left, and whirling dizzily in the immense concentric circles, round and round the borders of a gigantic amphitheater. the summit of whose walls is lost in the darkness and in the distance. But little time will be left for me to ponder upon my destiny. The circles rapidly grow small. We are plunging madly within the grasp of the whirlpool, and amid the roaring and bellowing and thundering of ocean and of tempest, the ship is quivering. Oh God! And going down. Note: the MS found in a bottle was originally published in 1831, and it was not until many years later that I became acquainted with the maps of Mercator, in which the ocean is represented as rushing by four mouths into the northern polar gulf, to be absorbed into the bowels of the earth, the pole itself being represented by a black rock towering to a prodigious height. So they thought the South Pole was a whirlpool. That's new. Alright, it is 11:30 and I'm tired as hell. Cthulhu tomorrow. Tonight, sleep. Oh my God, this stream is 3 hours long. Fuck me. Well, it's no bloody wonder I'm tired. I'm shocked I still have a voice. We might be doing ASMR Cthulhu tomorrow. A long water stream. You know what? That's probably why. Oh, it's the meme that never dies. Alright. I need to rest. Oh. Hopefully this makes up for yesterday. Sorry about that. As you can see, my internet is better. So that shouldn't happen again. That was rage-inducing. But yes. I think I have plenty of... I liked the no hands, the sexy ghosts aren't real, opens the door and floods submarine. Yeah. Oh, so I misread everything. I liked the no hands, the sexy ghosts aren't real, opens his door and floods submarine. There we go. Oh, you can tell I'm tired because I'm not reading things properly anymore. My eyes are just like, a little blah. Which is funny because I need to continue reading to fix my dissertation tomorrow. Yeah, what the shit. Alright. In the meantime, do not eat or drink any questionable substances. Make smart decisions, do not die. Dying is absolutely forbidden. And I will see all of you wonderful people at a later time. Take care, guys. Drink water. And make better decisions than I made tonight. My poor fucking voice.